this is my struggle in our community, is to just make room, make sure that mothers, aunties, daughters, sisters are respected in all ways, from our storytelling with how we're managing and living our lives and as families and aunties and in the home, and also like our sensibility around approaching the natural world, I think could really inform this space in a good way.
MindBend. Non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness for MindBend Creative.
Mikaela de la Myco, thank you for joining me on the MindBend podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. I met you at the Awakening of Consciousness conference last month here in Los Angeles. Today's November 1st, and happy Dia de los Muertos, by the way.
It's the ancestor time.
I was going to ask you if you celebrated yesterday in a way that is unique to you, that you look forward to every year. How do you commemorate that day?
Yeah, so death is such an intrinsic part of, I think, my worldview and practice. I lost two of my fathers, my biological and my step. And so to shepherd and steward those bodies through to the other side in the way that I was able to, once at 14 and once later in life at 22, it became a tender thing for me to engage in connection and communication with the other side. It became intrinsic to my worldview. There's a lot of unfinished business that I had. And so creating the Ofrenda, the traditional Dia de Muerto, Ofrenda is something that we participate in our home. So we lit those candles last night. We put out food for them. I mean, the other side and the people that we care for on the other side are continuing to do their own spiritual work. And so here in the living world, we have the opportunity to feed them, to continue to throw flowers on their path, to make sure that they, are remembered. And I forgot who said it, but I was just watching a documentary of Depeche Mode, and they did a concert in Mexico City. And it was said in that you don't receive eternal life by achieving immortality, that you live forever in the memory of your friends and in the stories that they tell of you. So yeah, I do observe through storytelling, my family, my life, the people who have passed on. Yeah. And I make sure that my son is involved in that work as well, that he has a relationship to his ancestors too.
Amazing. The difference between shepherding someone through that process or observing that process at 14 versus 22 is quite significant, right?
Absolutely.
My mom passed last August, and it was an 8-year cancer experience, and I was not home for the majority of that hospice experience. My sister and my dad bore the brunt of that, and my takeaway was that it's a pretty dehumanizing experience, like that, just the body deteriorating and the things that she was going through, like violently, physically, in that time is like really hard to, traumatizing for my dad and sister for sure. Yeah. But the relationship with death, and I know that towards the end of my mom's life, I tried to speak with her very candidly about her feelings around what she was contending with, and it's a gap in our language capability, isn't it?
I would say so. We struggle with things like grief. We struggle with things like the passing on, the changing of seasons and things. And the way that people are sent out, that they're cared for at end of life is super important. I've really appreciated the work of specific caretakers and healers, people that were elders to me in my journey, developing my practice as a psychedelic practitioner, that focus specifically on end of life. So I really wish at 14 I knew about psilocybin mushrooms and would have probably supported my dad, who also had cancer. So, it's a good thing now in the ceremonies that I sit in, that I hold true. I know that my healing and the work that I do does not exist in a vacuum. And so the ancestors are up on that altar every time I eat mushroom, because it's like really important that they feel the impact of this work, that my descendants are going to feel it and my ancestors are going to feel it, and that I'm like constantly bringing their story into my psychedelic experiences. I find that to be really important.
And I've heard you say something beautiful about the knowledge of the mushroom and the disintegration of the body, then the reintegration later, like that process of that earthly process, and So that's a very fitting metaphor. I want to ask you more about the wisdom of that particular organism, but before we go deeper into that, mush womb.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
mothers
talk about a
of the
cyclical
mushroom.
nature too.
Yeah.
The womb is constantly dying and being reborn. And so I just feel it's very fitting for this as a symbol and also as like a physical process that takes place in the bodies of some people. And I'm a lay womb care practitioner, so I was initiated in a tradition of yoni steaming or bottom steaming, which is the practice of preparing herbs in a pot, squatting over them with many blankets, basically creating a sweat lodge in your skirt for feminine wellness, and men can do them too as well. It's not gender specific. And so this womb care really delivered me through things like hormonal birth control, right? Like I was on hormonal birth control for 11 years and I drank ayahuasca at 21, and a big assignment that I was put on after that journey was it's time to leave hormonal birth control forever. And I kind of just like jumped into
that was something that was illustrated through the ayahuasca ceremony.
Yeah, it was a really clear. I went in with a implant in my arm. It's called Nexplanon, and it was really clear that I wanted to take it out of my body after the journey was over. And what that felt like was just like a disconnection from what that was. And so it was cool because Mush Womb really developed out of my own interest in the womb and like the female reproductive system as like this place of magic, this place of birth, this place of death.
Something you'd always been connected to.
Forever,
Yeah.
and had been largely disconnected to through hormonal birth control. But as a means of survival as well through the age of censorship. So I started in the psychedelic community by entering spaces like Clubhouse. I don't know if you remember Clubhouse, but during 2020, when the lockdown was going on, we were all trying to find each other. So someone heard me speak on a show and they were like, you should run your own room and have your own like Clubhouse room.
Had you had any kind of social footprint before that?
Not really.
Okay.
I had an Instagram on the low, personal, not much. And so I got on there and I was conceiving of a name, and Mush Womb Temple came up in that. And I was like, oh, that's kind of sick. Like, I want to do that. It has a ring to it.
Absolutely.
And then I was creating on TikTok. So I started creating on TikTok back when you could do hashtag psilocybin on TikTok. You used to be able to. Hashtag trip sitter, hashtag psychedelic therapy. Like there was not that many people talking about psychedelics
2020.
on TikTok in 2020. And so my platform actually started booming around the same time as the Clubhouse stuff did. So 2020 and 2021, I think, were huge for psychedelics. And the reason I think that is because if you can't go out, go in, you know, if you like can't explore your outside environment, a lot of people were exploring their inside environments.
Yeah,
and
for
so,
better and for worse.
Yeah. I mean, the shadow to it all. But I would say in the TikTok space, I could write instead of mushroom, mush womb, and just keep it going. I wasn't getting flagged, you know? And so I was like, this is helping me continue the legacy of this education, which what was starting to develop in the education that I was giving was psilocybin for female-bodied people having menstrual cycles. What are the intersections of psilocybin and how does it affect the menstrual cycle? And I started eating mushrooms while pregnant in 2019. And so I started sharing my story out around integrating psilocybin mushrooms into the pregnancy experience. And so Mush Womb as a concept, I think, really supported me in being able to tell that story without getting a lot of censorship. Until now, my Instagram account has since been deleted.
How was it that you came to consume psilocybin mushrooms during your pregnancy? Is that a practice that you had established long before you were pregnant and you said, I don't need to change this? Or were you curious? Or how did that start for you?
So in college, I started to engage in psychoactive substances. I mean, I had already done MDMA, you know, as 14-year-old. That was like a rape kid, you know, here in LA.
Yeah.
And I got engaged with first LSD. So hence my affinity towards LSD as a medicine, because that was like my first kind of breakthrough experience. And then I found psilocybin the same year. So I had a relationship with psilocybin, you know, for 6 years before I got pregnant, and they had been instrumental. I'm not the kind of person that said psilocybin, you know, mushrooms saved my life, right? I mean, yeah, I was suicidal and I had depression all through my teen years. However, I do track my life pre-psychedelics and post. Like there was a big shift there.
Wow.
And I had this
14 then. That's the...
I mean, MDMA at 14, but then psilocybin at like 19.
Okay.
And then ayahuasca shortly after. And so 6 years of engaging with psilocybin, I got pregnant. And then the question was, how safe are psilocybin mushrooms in pregnancy? Because I have this incredible relationship with this substance that's been a teacher for me and an ally, part of my regular maintenance now. And I rely on it as a friend. And now I have this new experience happening in my body, and there's really nothing here. Even the most well-meaning, like progressive people in forums online were answering mothers who had been asking the question, like, how dare you ask this? You really just can't stay sober for 9 months. Like there was so much shame and stigma.
You saw the question coming up, and it was getting...
It was in other spaces. Like it was on Arrowhead. It was on, these little vaults, like these forum spaces, like before Reddit, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was like, there's so much hostility. And when there's hostility and prohibition, we get a lack of information. Mm-hmm. And so I knew the internet was not going to be a place for me to learn. And I was really grateful to have spent some time in Indigenous-based spaces and brown and culturally competent spaces. And so I had an elder to talk to. And so I consulted with her with the help of a translator, because I'm one of those Mexican people who don't speak Spanish. Uh-huh. And so with the help of a friend, got to field these questions of her. And not only did she verbally give me in my community growing up, this was a big part of what we did as pregnant bodies. Just being pregnant doesn't break your relationship with mushrooms. In our tradition, we eat them as young as 3 years old. Like, they just had a really well ingrained and integrated system for welcoming and trusting these mushrooms, Teonanankat. And so she not only said these things to me, but in an upcoming ceremony, like really welcomed me as a very pregnant person, full-bellied, to sit in their ceremony. So not only was it like a verbal, this is cool, but also, you are welcome here, visibly pregnant. We will not shame you for being here. You belong here. And then I continued to take my son, 3 months, 9 months old, to these ceremonies too. I would ingest, breastfeed with him, and we were really held in that container. So I had some permission, and I recognize that permission is not something that most women in the West are going to have. And so when the time finally came, I'd been sharing my story out for a long time. Social media, Instagram was a huge space for me to do that. I finally got an email from James Fadiman.
Who had found you online?
That he was consulting for a microdosing company called the Microdosing Institute. They're based in the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. And I'd been doing education for them for some time, like doing, presentations and other things like that. He's their primary consultant on microdosing. Okay. And so he was writing a book, Microdosing for Enhanced Human Performance, Healing, and Health, and wanted to do a chapter on women's health and pregnancy, breastfeeding, and postpartum. And he's like, who is talking about this? And Microdosing Institute put us in touch.
Great. And this is prior to the study. This is the catalyst for the study?
This is what started that study.
Yeah. Let me ask one clarifying question. The introduction to the open, welcoming community space, that was through a family member?
So I got to know Getting to the Root is the name of the nonprofit organization. They preserve Indigenous teachings. They're based in the Bay Area.
Okay, Getting to the Root.
Getting to the Root. Amazing organization. Liz, she's just a good friend of my best friend. And so I got to know them, sat in an abundance ceremony with them. They sit with Hikuri, Peyote, do sweat. They're good people, very, very solid humans. And they center the voices of most of the Wirarika, Huichol elders. So they do the Peyote pilgrimage and teach a lot about the land. It's not really all about the psychedelic experience, but it's about the original teachings of these folks and preserving it. And so they have a nonprofit. I got to know them through Instagram, through a friend. And then, when it came time for me to ask, the elder that they were associated with was the person I spoke to.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So Dr. Fadiman reaches out. Yep. You've already been in touch with the institution that he's working with. Yep. And you said, let's make research.
So what did I say? He told me that he was doing this project to develop this book. And he was connected to a UK-based midwife, Naomi Tolson, who was interviewing, like, not cold calls, but warm calls, and was just, like, handwriting, like, testimonials. And I asked him, I was like, would you be at all open to me designing a survey so that you could get this information while you sleep. And I will use my social media platform that's already been in some ways primed for this discussion.
Yeah.
Because I'd been talking about it for 3 years already.
So participants could be lined up.
Yeah. I was like, we could run it and see what happens. And then 411, I mean, we had flyers. I was going to women's gatherings. I was handing out QR codes, talking about it on panels, like, submit to the survey. Tell us about your experience. You know, like, it was very grassroots, completely self-funded. We were able to raise $7,000 just to pay for supplies and other things.
Grassroots researcher is the term that you use, right?
Yeah, grassroots researcher, community, citizen scientist.
Citizen scientist.
That's what, and I was really inspired by James Fadiman when I was just a little baby in this space. I saw him talk at a LAMPS conference at UCLA. It was one of the first psychedelic conferences UCLA ever did. He's on Zoom talking about his microdosing research and his citizen science project. That was 7 years ago. So for him to land in my email saying, I need your help now, was like a pinch me moment. And I was like, I think I know how we might be able to approach this. So he really trusted me. He helped develop the questions with me. And we worked on it together.
Pausing and zooming out 1 trillion feet, what was it at the nucleus of the thing that made you feel like this space had resonance and meaning and importance? Just what was it in you that was compelled to meet these people and get involved in this work? And you can address this however you want to. I have an idea.
Okay.
But yeah.
I think I've been a weirdo all my life. I felt very out, like, forever. And when I finally got in touch with the version of myself that I was through the psychedelic, like, journey work and art and artistry and music, I was like, wow, there's got to be other people that might enjoy this space too. And I had a dear friend in college, Paris Finney. We would meditate. He was very psychonautic. And yeah, he's like, there are other people. He was telling me about Terrence McKenna. I was like, where are these folks? To find the other situation. I didn't grow up in the Bay. I grew up in LA. They have a very entrenched psychedelic community in the Bay. So I was like, is there anything like this here? And I found it. And I felt drawn. And then I also felt curious and accepted. And I was on the outside of even that community for a long time. And I just carved my little way in here, and somehow people care about what I say now. So,
well, I'm so glad that you're here and here to share today. So, speaking of this survey, 411 participants seems like a pretty healthy number.
I mean, it's enough for a decent enough sample size so that we can start looking at data. I mean, we have the individual stories, which I think are actually the most potent components. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a storytelling platform. You understand how important storytelling is, and mothers trust mothers more than anything else. Yeah. And so to highlight and center that qualitative information was absolutely essential for us as researchers to actually look at testimony. But when you have that big of a sample size, you can start disseminating some information and numbers from all of that. So there was some data points I feel like we really could have hit the head on a little bit better. And that is also my growth edge. That's
in the design of the actual protocol?
There's growth edges that I had as a citizen scientist. I did not have a data analyst on team when I designed it, right? I had James Fadiman, who's very heavy on qualitative.
Okay.
So we have so much qualitative, but some of the quantitative points that I think would have been really interesting that we got to adjust the survey for later was for the mothers, 278 of them ingested while pregnant. Of those, what were the birth outcomes?
Pausing real fast. Sorry, jumping. What was the survey titled, and how did
Mothers
people
of the
know?
Mushroom.
It was Mothers of the Mushroom, but when it was presented to someone who would take it and fill out the information and speak to their experience, it was presented as, we're using this to determine what your experience is while ingesting psilocybin mushrooms before, during, and after pregnancy?
The questions did that. So essentially, my social platform was, hey, have you eaten mushrooms while pregnant, breastfeeding, or postpartum? Come tell us about your experience. And then the questions led the way. What compelled you to eat while pregnant? What compelled you to eat during the birth, after the birth? What challenges did you notice? We had a plethora of questions for folks. And some folks met every category, and some didn't meet all of them. Some of them were grandmothers who ate mushrooms, but their babies, were in... They're experiencing benefit as a grandmother now ingesting mushrooms. So it's we have a very broad reach on it. And that's actually what I kind of liked is we have whole lanes of data points now that we can uncover data points about pregnancy. We can uncover data points about breastfeeding postpartum best practices. So it's cool to actually not have this narrow view. We're looking at psilocybin mushrooms for postpartum depression. That's a narrow view, right? Because what if integrating psilocybin during pregnancy can be preventative? And we saw some of that come out in the data, which was really cool. So, yeah.
Okay, that was so there wasn't a focus on the awareness of postpartum depression or preparation or preventative measures.
Yeah. It was super open.
But postpartum depression did kind of inform the work to begin with. Is that something that you had experienced?
I mean, I would say because I had relationship with mushrooms, I found them in my personal experience to be really supportive for what might have shown up as postpartum depression. And at 5 weeks postpartum, yeah, I started to feel the twinge of overwhelm and like, I'm tired. I'm overworked. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have the support networks that I need. And so I had a pretty solid dose at 5 weeks with my son by firelight. I do not miss a single winter solstice. My son was born at the end of November. So it was winter solstice. He's just like a little baby on a couch, and I'm eating medicine and connecting with him and breastfeeding with him. And I'm like, wow, this is really important for me to be in this headspace with this new baby so I can really see him in this way. And all the frustration and all the rage and the anger and the tiredness, it's not his fault. And so that was really instrumental for me. And I think really changed the trajectory of what could have developed into a more severe postpartum depression. It really, I think, intervened in the spiraling out of that.
What did you conceptualize as being the ripple effect of putting the work into doing the research? Like, what were some of your highest level hopes that could come from it? What were some of the most practical takeaways that could come from putting in the time and the work to make research like that happen?
Yeah, I think what we were able to accomplish at that time was to fill a gap that just was an abyss, essentially. So the small victory is that there's something now. People would say, oh, there's no research on this subject. It's like, well, that's not necessarily true. There's not research in the way that we look at research, but I even think that presenting it and orchestrating research in this way is going to just precede what's going to come, and hoping to inform, hoping to inspire, hoping to continue. So that's like a high level wish, is like, if we've done this, we have some preliminary information, let other people that can do double blind studies that have funding, like actually parse this out with us. Ultimately, we only had one goal in mind: to supply James Fadiman with testimonies for his book.
Okay.
That was the original intent, to just give those to him. And we were able to supply that. It was a microdosing handbook. So a number of mothers microdosed only. So I was able to hand him those data points in a spreadsheet. And when we had our meeting, he was like, this is a lot more than I thought we'd ever have. I mean, it was like 200 testimonies or something. You only needed like 5. And so he's like, what are you going to do with all this? What are you going to do with this?
Well, it's accessible. The results of the study are accessible through your website, correct?
Yeah. So I asked him, like, do you feel okay with me doing what I want to do with this information? What I think might be appropriate? He's like, well, we've gotten what we needed. So you already handled that. So go forth, go forth and do what you feel like you need to do. And for me, as an educator in this space, I find it obscenely important to make this kind of information as accessible as humanly possible. I think there's such a huge divide between what the layperson understands and the scientific literature. So I was like, if we are going to develop any of this, I'm going to need some web development help, because I want to present these findings for the community in a way that they can really reach into it, understand in a multimedia, sensory-based space. And so I was able to get in touch with a web developer who, it wasn't necessarily pro bono, but it was really inexpensive considering the work that she did for us.
And the work is excellent. I
think the website came out okay.
Yeah, it's clean. Having that access point, high functioning, is really important.
I thought that was important. And what was also important to me was, can we tell this research like a story? And so we wrote that research paper together. And yeah, me and Wendy Perkins-Shoeff, who helped me with this project, it took a little over a year. It was like a year and a couple months from when I hooked up with her to when it was finally released, actually February of 2025. So it's pretty fresh.
Wow.
And I made it really clear. I was like, I want the research paper to be written at a high school reading level. Because why not? Like, why do we have to make this so inaccessibly,
academic and
language that
sounding.
it like really pushes people out of the conversation. And these are moms, right? Some of them are not even like college graduates, we all deserve to have this information. And so we wrote it at a high school reading level, and then I wanted to record an audiobook version of it because I was like, hey, we got our hands in dishes, we're folding laundry, no one's gonna sit down on their phone and like read this fucking 15-page paper, so let's make music out of it, let's talk to them, let's make it audible for them. And so that accessibility piece was super important for me. That was like my vision for what I wanted to create with that. And we have the cute graphs, we have and then the stories were important. I was like, I want to be able to anonymize the stories, give their kind of general locations so that we just have an idea. What are the age ranges of people doing this work? Like, where are they at, And so this is not a mom's psychedelic social club. This is a place for these stories to live so that other people who have zero can have something. So Mothers of the Mushroom was kind of born out of that. And the greater vision was, I of course would have loved more submissions, of course, but I think 411 is plenty. And I would have built in more quantitative data points because, like I was saying, 278 mothers ingested while pregnant. That is a huge question in our spaces. Are psilocybin mushrooms safe in pregnancy? You can't really determine safety unless you do longitudinal studies, right? But what we could have looked at was, for the mothers who ingested while pregnant, how much did you have? When did you have it? And what were the outcomes of the births? Like, what were the gestational ages? What was the length? What was the age? Were there any complications? Because if you get that data set, then you can compare that to national averages and understand if you control for no other factor, the integration of psilocybin, does it push these babies beyond any kind of average? So we were able to study 13 mothers that ingested while pregnant, and those birth outcomes do not deviate from the general population of births. But what we need to do is follow those kids to 5 and 10 and 15 and 20. My son is almost 6, and I consumed microdoses and higher doses throughout my pregnancy, and he's a brilliant kid. So it would be nice to just kind of see the only way we can assess for safety is longitudinal, and to actually follow the lives of these families over the course of generations.
Is that happening now?
That requires funding.
Yeah.
So
that's part of your work now, is achieving funding.
Long term. Yeah. And we've had generous donors and have been in community, but I think people are really concerned about citizen science.
Yeah.
They're concerned about letting pregnant people eat mushrooms and endorsing that. There's a lot of skepticism and concern about, just letting lay people talk to each other in this way. So
Sure.
I've definitely run up against stigmas. I've gone and put in proposals to speak at conferences and been told that this is not real science.
At scientific conferences?
At mushroom conferences and the East Coast, yeah.
Yeah.
I've gotten letters and stuff, yeah.
Do you have advocates who identify as hardcore scientists or clinicians that are starting to circle around and trying to devise how they can support or potentially expand on what you'd like to do studies-wise?
I'm so grateful that I am held in a vast network of female scientists that have taken me under their wing. And we've spoken on panels at MAPS conference, and my work is just held in the same esteem as they hold those, other voices. And so I have people rooting for me entirely. I have people with white coats and midwives, PhDs that are submitting this research to formal academic journals. And I think once those things kind of happen, when they are peer reviewed, when they are welcome into academic journals, then there might increase the literacy and increase the legitimacy of the work.
I want to shift a little bit into one of the overarching themes for the website that you first come across is rematriating entheogens. Can you speak to what that means? And this study seems like it's definitely one of the ways in which that work is being done, but how are people fitting into that, and where are you educating on that?
Absolutely. So I think rematriate, and it's such a mouthy little phrase. I think people struggle with it sometimes when I talk in spaces. They're like, we're not used to saying rematriate. We're used to saying repatriate, right? To repatriate someone means to bring them back to their home country, right? Rematriate is a terminology that comes from the indigenous land back movement, the American Indian movement, which is to restore people back to ancestral homelands, to also restore this sense of stewardship among matriarchal caretakers, to restore rights, roles, responsibilities, respect, resources to maternal caretakers of land. And when I walk through psychedelic spaces, conferences, and otherwise, I don't see enough female leadership. Like, and I'm talking leadership, like advice, like advisory committees, you know? We are replicating similar wounds from the overculture in our space because we haven't rectified those things. And so especially the voices of Indigenous women, contemporary Indigenous women, women of color, those kinds of voices, survivors of all kinds, I just feel like we really belong here and that our perspectives are extremely valuable. And I'm unapologetically a femme. And I think that's really important to, you know, caretake our little corner of the garden. Like, women matter in our psychedelic community. And so rematriating entheogens became kind of my thesis. Like, this is my struggle in our community, is to just make room, make sure that mothers, aunties, daughters, sisters are respected in all ways, from our storytelling with how we're managing and living our lives and as families and aunties and in the home, and also like our sensibility around approaching the natural world, I think, could really inform this space in a good way. So
the female identifying sensibility?
Yeah, these sensibilities around just sensitivity to the natural world, this animism, that everything is alive and that is not a natural resource. Like, these are not natural resources. That is a terminology that we've applied to trees. I often think about the work of Riane Eisler, for example, who wrote Chalice and the Blade. I mean, I'm a student of feminist histories, and so I've been really interested in how we got to this point. How did we arrive at scientific reductionist reasoning? This is not the only template for the way that we look at the world. We don't just look at the human body as like an amalgamation of mechanical parts, but at a certain time in history, i.e. like the 16th century in Europe, that is where a lot of those worldviews got embedded, and it happened hand in hand with the European witch trial. So the removal of certain worldviews, animist worldviews in Europe, really made way for this gap that like got filled by capitalism, got filled by understanding the body as just a labor for work and a machine for labor and work, and the removal of people from their lands for privatization. So yeah, it's like the reclamation of this not just feminine worldview, but this like nature-based worldview that I think our space is really kind of struggling to integrate to.
Share with us your impressions, your truth, your understanding of the spirits that inhabit the nature and the mushroom maybe specifically, or the ergot, and we can sort of get into liquid sunshine from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love an animist worldview. I think it is like expounding out rematriation and rematriating entheogens. Rematriating entheogens is like a perspective that I think colors a lot of the things in the world. So yeah, Mothers of the Mushroom is part of that. My work with survivors is part of that. And like the worldview around animism as a foundation. So animism as a foundation is like, for me, such a big wound. I think people are really clinging to indigenous worldviews because they've been able to maintain an animist worldview, being able to see everything as alive and feeling a part of the greater whole. Like, not I'm in nature, right? It's like we are
of nature.
We are nature, right? So there is no separation. And that's like really hard because it's been so many generations of literally beating that out of us, like making us feel very afraid to even think that way. And I mean, I've talked to some of my European relatives and friends about like, oh, I don't know how to dance. You know, white people can't dance. And I mean, I've asked them, like, do you have dance in your family? How long ago has it been? And they're like, you know, in the Christian cult for like 7 generations. And I was like, I don't think you don't know how to dance. I think you were told by many people in your family that you couldn't, and that you were literally like made to be afraid of that part of yourself.
It's what Footloose is all about.
I mean, we deal with it in San Diego. We have cabaret licenses and you can't dance it unless you have a permit. It's like ridiculous. So I just, the animist worldview and the worldview around the sensual body, that sensuality is not sexuality, though both are incredibly sacred and extremely valuable in our space. Sensuality is the sensitivity that we have to sensory input. It's the way of being a sensing being. And so
sensuality is the sensitivity that we have to sensory input.
Correct. Ish. Yeah. Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
There's a great book called Spell of the Sensuous, and it just talks about
Spell of the Sensuous.
The Spell of the Sensuous. It's
Amazing.
So good. And just, it really talks about how the sensory input that we experience is like it's how we engage.
Do you have a writing practice, prose or poetry practice?
I do.
Yeah. Language is a beautiful thing, and you use it beautifully, and
Thank
that
you.
really helps.
I would say so.
Because I think that it's fun for you to express. And it makes it fun for others, I think, to process.
Terence McKenna is such an interesting person because he talks about the linguistic centers of the brain in the development of the stone ape hypothesis, how psilocybin mushrooms really impacted early hominids. And he talked about the symbolic language, the development of symbolic thinking, visionary thought, and the ability to express visionary thought. And what I thought was incredibly fascinating about some of the outcomes of these births and mothers from the Mothers of the Mushroom research paper, completely unprompted, being asked the question, what did you notice about your child that you like ascribe to your relationship with the mushroom? Like, what do you think the mushroom did for your kids? They said, my kids have incredible grasp of language.
Wow, that came up as a theme.
Over and over. And I would say the same thing about my son. His incredible vocabulary. And I think if mushrooms have helped me, it's been in expression through language.
That's very heartening.
It's been very cool. Yeah. So the sensual body, yeah.
Yeah, and also, and so as an advocate for survivors of sensual assault or those who have sustained sensual assault in wellness spaces, and that was the first time that I had seen that terminology, that use of that term, sensual assault. And that feels like it invites in people who have experienced trespass in multiple forms without it having to be explicitly about that particular power dynamic.
Correct.
Yeah. And I think that's very important, and that's why I appreciate that language so much, because there's a lot more going on there, isn't there?
I wanted to expand the definition of the kinds of harms that people can experience in these altered states and in altered states spaces, including the yoga community and sweat lodge and, all kinds of
spaces,
vulnerability spaces, intimate spaces that we trust each other to hold each other in. And that could be sensual assault. I think really also describes, like, as you said, trespass and violation. Doesn't have to be sexual in nature, but it could be music is loud and abrasive on purpose to elicit a gnarly response. I've seen it. I've been in those ayahuasca journeys where people are just banging on drums incessantly to invoke some kind of massive response in people. And as a sexual assault survivor, I'm just like, hey, this is unnecessary. I'm sensitive enough. I don't need this loud ass drum in my ear to get me to this crack open spot. And even if I cracked open, what would you even do with me? What's the plan here? You're just thumbing the wound to get some kind of shaking, radical, whatever. I've just noticed that healing can happen in a gentle and penetrating and kind way. It does not need to be dramatic in order to be effective.
Oh, you're speaking to something that I'll get into with you off camera later.
Okay, sure.
But it's hard. I never, this is not about me. This is about sharing what you have to share. And sometimes anecdotes will creep in, but I'd like to talk to you about something
I would
later.
love to talk to you
I'm
about
fascinated by the topic, and I think I see this cosplay occurring in this space. And maybe there's even good intention, but sometimes it's a lot of disconnected intention and affectation. And we're talking about real outcomes and real effect.
Unfortunately, I would say that we need to study this, and I am developing a survivor survey, like for the psychedelic community, to just give your testimony about the things you've seen in this space and what ways you've been, essentially assaulted in this community. But I would say a lot of the harm happens from people operating outside of their scope of practice.
Sure.
People like thinking they could do more than they actually have the training to do. Taking on people that are far more complex than they need to, taking on way too much responsibility, myself included. I mean, I've had to learn this hard lesson being a practitioner, facilitator. What do I actually know, and what bodies do I actually know how to help?
Yeah.
And that there are no knights in shining armor, like I'm going to be the one to, fix all the people. We do need to work in networks of highly competent professionals and lay people in many fields in order to help actually be helpful to somebody. And so, yes, there is that lack of, there is hubris in our space, for sure. There's this self-initiating that, people just appoint themselves and call themselves a shaman. I can't even tell you how many times I've traveled to vegan cafes and met how many shamans in the lobby doing a Instagram live. Like, I don't know, it's just kind of this interesting inflation of self-importance. These illusions of grandeur do not miss anyone in this space. And so it's really important for all of us to stay really humble, to continue to refine our practice, to be able to take breaks. And if a lot of people are trying to do this for money, you can't take breaks. So you make mistakes and you got to keep going. I can't even tell you, I've seen it myself of, someone gets harmed dramatically in a space, sometimes even dies, and that practitioner has to do more ceremony in order to pay the lawyer fees. It's just this horrific cycle of things. So it's like we're trying to stop a moving train here and trying to instill integrity into people that we don't have regulatory bodies here.
Right. There are no regulatory bodies, and that continues to be, it's an ongoing discussion at every conference.
Mm-hmm.
And
people are trying, but even I listen to survivor stories all the time that are going to some of the only regulatory bodies they're in, and they're still falling through the cracks because those spaces are not also attuned to survivor needs. There's big money interest in here. I've seen lots of cease and desist orders go out for articles that took months to write, to call out an Iboga clinic head leader, whatever. And as soon as it's about to get published, they're like, if you do this, I will, hire the strongest defamation lawyer in the United States to come after you. Like, survivors are literally getting threatened to not share their stories. It's a really weird space. If we're here to liberate consciousness, like, why are we still down pressing people in any way? So survivorship in the psychedelic community, sensual assault, being able to talk about our shadows like this, I think is vital. It's embarrassing, but the embarrassment is worth it if it just makes us better. I don't think we have to avoid this because it's uncomfortable. Like, conflict is extremely generative, and it only is going to serve the greater safety if we openly talk about these topics. And we can do it in a way that doesn't blame or shame anyone. We could do it in a way that uses active language and, not say, oh, a woman got assaulted. It's like someone assaulted her, that who gets assaulted? Like, someone assaults someone, right? Like, using active language, taking ownership and accountability for these kinds of things will only just serve to make our space better. But it's a tricky thing. There are lots of sides, and the sweeping under the rug thing has just been kind of ongoing because if we talk about it, it's going to ruin the movement.
What do you think, could you say that is a good, what's a good bit of advice in how to be able to, in your experience, be able to be open to and to care for these highly nuanced individuals? Like, it's tough. Like, we get caught up in trying to maintain ourselves in a healthy way and then interact with so many different kinds of people. What's the common thing? What does that come through? Meditation practice or a walking, or like, how do we find that calm, strong center to be able to, because I talk to plenty of just social workers and therapists who are so burned out, and if you're like a trip sitter and you're adding another layer of complexity by processing the psyche of someone who is experiencing so much newness, so much profundity, what are some, outside of the work that you've presented and just spoken about, like where can we find that strength and that grounding and that grace?
The earth. So we don't, and we're never designed to do this by ourselves. Yes, we might be the person receiving the story, but why are we the only one holding it? Like, why are we suffering in silence, like interacting with all of the psychic material? Can I go and take this to the river and go cry about it? Go bathe in it? Can I take this to the fire? Go write about it? Go burn it up? Can I go to a plant and fix this tea and say, hey, can you help me to remain strong? Can you help me to remain balanced in my own? Can I nurture my central nervous system with things like oats, things like spearmint, things like passion flower? Like, can I bathe myself with rosemary water and say, hey, this isn't mine, but I give it up. I give it back. You know, I'm here to be of service, but I'm here to not disintegrate myself in the process. Let me call on my allies.
And the earth can be your ally.
She composts everything. And speaking of just the, you know, doctrine of signatures with mushroom, is like they are master decomposers. And so we are just so reliant upon all things on earth, with earth, our ability to put our hands in soil, the negative ions we get from trees, and the neutralizing force that a pine forest can be, you know, watching sunset and sunrise. Like, these are all really important. And I have a very place-based spirituality. Like, it's not in the head, it's in the body. It's in your cuerpo. It's in, you know, the way that you connect and relate to things like pleasure and tears and those kinds of things. So I pray that practitioners of all kinds can just know that you're not designed to do this by yourself, to continue seeking out counsel and help from other people and trusted members of your community. And if you don't have that, go be outside, please. Go put your hands in some soil. Go find and bathe your feet in the river. Like, if you can, leave offerings, you know, pray for help in other ways, you know, send out prayers, you know, work with tobacco in a good way. Like, we have these modalities that have always been a part. Ecstatic dance movement. I'm not talking about ecstatic dance like in San Francisco on a Friday night. Like, I'm talking about move your body and pray and cry and do those things. So it's not all in the head. And I think therapy and all of these incredible modalities have done incredible things for people to help analyze their thoughts. But I don't think they touch quite on the lattice that is the body and how all these things are stored up in it. And then they can't provide exit for those things. So we can find exit in the body, and we can find support from the plant nations.
Thank you. 2 more points that I'd like to touch on before our hour has concluded, and then I'll feel really good about having maximized this opportunity with you. Sekhem Reiki?
Sure, yeah.
I studied Reiki in New York City 1 and 2. A friend of mine was practicing, and she did it with me, and it resonated for me, and I think it's a very beautiful modality of the Japanese lineage. I was not aware of the Egyptian energy medicine hands work. Can you tell us a little bit about it, please?
Yeah, give thanks. So I was initiated into a Yoni Steam tradition by a neo-Kemetic, like, spiritual scholar, right? So we are kind of reclaiming and kind of like pulling out the old bones of just the legacy of that nation. And so I found the Yoni Steam tradition. It's called the Mayoni At. So Ma'at is an Egyptian goddess that really colors a lot of my work. And so I knew about her. I was really fascinated by Egyptology, Kemet generally. And before I got pregnant, I met a teacher from Cuba. She was doing Reiki attunements. And I had heard about Usui, but I just wasn't really drawn to it because I don't have a ton of affinity to Japanese culture per se. And when I learned that, first, she's a Cuban woman. So my grandfather lived in Cuba for many years, and he was a radio DJ in Havana. And that felt like an affinity, and it was in my neighborhood, and it was in Sekhemet, and I was like, I love Sekhemet. Sekhemet is raw. I don't know how much you know about Egyptian gods and goddesses, but she's a lion-headed protectress goddess who is quite bloodthirsty. She's kind of like equivalent to maybe like a Kali in Egyptology. And so to be able to like be invited into that energy was wild. And we learned kind of about like the triple goddess forms of I don't know. Do you know maiden, mother, crone? Have you heard of this? It's
a little bit.
Yeah, maiden, mother, crone. So you have maiden, which is Hathor or Heteru. You have mother, who's Aset or Isis. And then you have Sekhmet, who is like our crone of, Sekhmet. And so that attunement was really a powerful one. And I got pregnant very shortly after. And I would say I don't necessarily follow those practices entirely. I received my attunement, and I feel like that was plenty. There are symbols associated. However, the laying of hands and the supporting of people physically, I found to be very important in my work. And I feel like it's very colored by that experience. The heat in my hands, the ability to like pray for guidance for how to work my hands in these journeys, especially someone who's trying to not essentially harm someone either.
Yeah. How
do I use my hands in these journeys? How do I work with uteruses? I mean, part of my mush womb work is offering a low dose of psilocybin and then offering hands-on uterine work and touching people's abdomens and engaging with this like sensual material that could be coming up.
How did that come about?
Yeah, that's like mush womb for real. I started doing it for myself and found it to be extremely valuable. I mean, I learned about yoni steaming, and then I was like drinking tea while I was yoni steaming, and I was just thinking to myself, the imaginative thinking, the symbolic thinking, the non-linear headspace that you can arrive at with psilocybin, I think could be really effective for helping these massage practices, these hands-on care practices be ever more like effective. And so I started eating mushroom, and I solo journey often, and started to do hands-on womb work while I was in the mushroom space, and was like, wow, I can access pretty intense memory space, and not just bad memories, but joyful ones too. And so I started integrating that in my client work, and I found that to be really effective. So yeah, my hands-on with wombs, and then also the elder that I learned with eating mushrooms, she helped me with my hands-on work, and I'll leave it here because I think it's a really gentle teaching. So I was having a really challenging time by the fire in Mount Shasta with Martin, my son, who was 9 months old at the time. I'd driven 11 hours just to be in that journey, and the mushrooms were strong, and I was laying on the ground outside. It was very cold. I was worried about him. I was worried about myself, and it was one of the harder journeys I'd had. And I'm looking around the group, and I felt like the space wasn't being respected. It was just like the closest thing to a bad trip I'd had. Mm-hmm. And I had never had one. Mm. And so she came up to me real gentle, and she just came to my back and just started gently tapping my back like a baby. Like, you're holding a baby and you're just tapping their back when they're crying. And that tapping, obviously now knowing it's supporting my vagus nerve and regulating my breathing and all that stuff, but it was so elementary. It was so primal. It was so maternal. It was all those things. That's what rematriation is about. It's like you can care for people in altered states if you know how to care for kids, and vice versa. Me supporting people in altered states totally helped equip me to show up for my kid and all of, his erratic behaviors as a toddler. And the same thing, the patience that I cultivated in my motherhood journey also has supported the way that I show up for the people that I care for. And so that gentle tapping on the back, I think, was vital, and it carried with me forever. And now when I'm with people that I'm holding space for, that gentle hands-on rhythmic tapping on the back talks to and speaks to the baby in every person I've sat for, and has provided incredible catharsis for, the smartest of clinicians that could analyze everything and every thought, but to just not be able to access that tender touch, especially ones that have mother wounds. So the Sekhem Reiki and the attunement of receiving that from a mother, the woman was a mother who gave this attunement to me, and just my teacher, this is literally the lineage of Indigenous elders, teachers, practitioners. It's literally you continuing their practice as purely as they showed you. That is our responsibility. And so to just be able to do that with my hands, so simple, so not thought out, so not like orchestrated or a certification or anything. It's just how mothers care for each other and children. To be able to give that to people so simple has just been like the greatest joy in my life.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that non-sexual touch, I've typically referred to it as non-sensual touch, but maybe I'll change the way I phrase it. But touch without a motive that doesn't serve the person being touched is really a gift. And we're fortunate if we're comfortable with one another to even hug each other. We know about the oxytocin, but that space and that practice, there's something very elegant about it, something very timeless about it, and something very necessary about it. Those are all things that I find very appealing about those containers and the potential therein. I'm glad we got to speak about that too.
Yeah.
One last point. Liquid sunshine.
Yeah.
Could you speak to that? I mean, just the phrase is fun, but we're talking potentially now in this, like I alluded to at the beginning of our conversation, you had mentioned about how the mushroom was a more subterranean, potentially a lower light. The air god is a sunshine reality. And there's a place on your website that talks about microdosing of air god, which I couldn't find a lot of information about. So to whatever extent you're comfortable, let's kind of work towards closing with talking about this liquid sunshine reality.
Sure, absolutely. So, I mean, it was my first classic psychedelic. I feel like I find a lot of home in LSD, and I find a lot of home in LSD, but I didn't know that you didn't have to have a whole tab of LSD in order to enjoy it. And microdosing ergot on my website, just for clarification, is one of those survival strategies, because like on my website, I for a time could say how to microdose LSD, but they were like, okay, you must be, supplying or whatever, so you need to change the language on this website. So I wrote microdosing ergot. And what is interesting in this, first, the doctrine of signatures, I think, is like a helpful model for just looking at, you're looking at the characteristics of a plant as they phenotypically like present in the world, what their growth habits are. And the doctrine of signatures is largely debatable in every case. Like a walnut looks like a brain. Okay, must be good for the brain. It's overly simplified in every fucking way. So I like to be very humble to that. It's like not this foolproof system by any means, but I just find that there's like a spiritual characteristic for things that are sun loving and things that are night loving. And so what is so cool also about things like LSA, for example, is that LSA is found in morning glory seeds, and morning glories do have an affinity towards like the twilight and the emergence of the sun for this technicolor time and space. And I've been intrigued about the history of ergot, because ergot fungus it was in the German midwifery toolkit. And we wouldn't have known, about its potential qualities for stopping hemorrhage, without their stewardship of these kind of ancestral medicines. And I just think yet again, we look at another instance to rematriate entheogens, to remember our origins when it comes to these substances, the original caretakers of this information. And yes, Albert Hofmann just so happened to get, commissioned to kind of develop medicine to support with, hemorrhage and headache and other things. And then, has his story with LSD. But he had to study German midwifery. He had to learn from those original people in order to even have a clue that this is what they were using this for. And so I'm glad I found LSD when I did, because it opened the doorway for me to then get curious about things like psilocybin, because I didn't even know psilocybin existed until LSD opened my eyes. And my question was, with LSD in particular, was, this is so like up for me. Like for some bodies, LSD can be very stimulating, and I didn't know you could have less than a tab. And that is how it was presented to me. Oh yeah, you have a tab of acid. I'm like, okay, this is like 3 days. I don't need this headspace for 3 days. I can't even smoke enough cigarettes to come down from this ever. And so I was like really reaching for, how do I get this sensation while like still being terrestrial. And so mushrooms really found me in that. But with what I love about the microdosing movement is that James Fadiman's protocol, to just like ring back to him, 1 day on, 2 days off. All the citizen scientific research that he ever did to develop the only microdosing protocol that has any data behind it, which is his protocol, was all developed by studying the microdosing practices of using LSD. We've just transposed it for psilocybin. So if we're going to talk about microdosing and 1 day on, 2 days off, like, we really got to give respect to Mama Ergo and LSD and the way that it's synthesized and all the lineage of that, because that was what he was studying when he was looking at the benefits of microdosing. So microdosing LSD has been particularly helpful for me and particularly helpful for people that don't find tremendous support with microdosing psilocybin, which some people don't. Some people don't receive this, overwhelming benefit from microdosing psilocybin. It's not for every person. So when I'm consulting with mothers that are, wanting to, or consulting with anyone who is like, I must not be a microdoser because I can't seem to figure out psilocybin. Mm-hmm. I'm like, hey, microdosing is a way of life. It's a way of being in relationship to all substances. And you can microdose caffeine. You can work with molecules in small amounts and like the least necessary. It's like a homeopathic approach to working with the natural world. Mm-hmm. Is this all about hyperconsumption? I mean, like, we have Bobinsana, we have plants that are highly endangered. We have bee cappy vine that takes a long time to grow. We have peyote. Do we need to eat the most amount? Oh man, I'm a like 15-gram mushroom head. It's like, great, good for you. But how little can we ingest and be conservative with that in order to get the highest amount and benefit? So for people who struggle with microdosing psilocybin, I do like to educate about microdosing LSD because I've just found it to be a nice alternative. And if LSD isn't the one for you, there's so many other substances that can be engaged with. And the thing I'll leave off with the folk herbalism piece is that we tend to put these natural substances and plant allies and teachers in some kind of strange hierarchy of the master plants and all of the master teacher plants at the top, right? There's DMT at like the top of the pyramid or whatever. And then we have like the humble chamomile at the bottom. That somehow it doesn't have like as much divinity as this other one. But certainly there is just as much divinity in a chamomile flower as in the bee cappy vine. So what we get to do is like learn how to listen, learn how to respect and care, and learn how to like play, relate, and learn how these substances work in our bodies, because I could get so much out of drinking a whole cup of oats as I can taking a whole microdose of psilocybin. I feel like I'd literally rather have a cup of oat tea than like have a microdose sometimes, because it's not always about the trip. It's really about learning how to feel good in our bodies. Yeah. So yeah, shout out to LSD, because that I think is such a perfect like analogy of what rematriating theogens is about. Like we can look at German midwives and how they were giving ergot mushrooms to mothers to progress their stalled labor. That was part of the midwifery medicine toolkit. And then we even have a question about mothers ingesting mushrooms. They're literally essential to the process of progressing this practice. So we just got to get really humble to the ones who did things before, and get really humble to who has the right information. Because I will say, just because you got a white coat and a degree doesn't mean that you know more than me.
If you would please tell us what might be bending your mind in this moment.
Bending my mind. I think honestly, just talking to you right now, just the fact that we just met like not that long ago, and just the power of humans trying to do a good thing. Like I will just always be mind bent by like how exhausting this current empire we live under is, and yet there is still this dramatic, tender hope that we all have for just trying to plant good seeds despite all the odds that are against us. I'm really mind bent by the perseverance of the human spirit. I'm really mind bent about how committed some people are to be on an assignment, and whatever that assignment is. I'm really humbled by that. I'm really humbled, and I'm astonished at our ability to do conflict resolution, to be different, as you said, to interface with lots of different personalities in this community, and to still try to be patient with one another. I'm really mind bent about that.
Thank you so much. How might people find you, if you'd share with us, please?
Absolutely. So I'm available, very accessible online. My website is mushwomb.love. You can find a lot of the research for the Mothers of the Mushroom Research Project at mothersofthemushroom.com. I used to be really active on Instagram, but because of censorship, I had my account deactivated in June, and it's never coming back. So that's hard. So don't find me on Instagram. Email me, reach out, be a friend, be a homie, sign up for my newsletter. Stay in touch in ways that are a slower pace, because I'm walking a little more slowly through the world right now.
It was such a pleasure to have you on the podcast today, Mikaela. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.